Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. We are coming to you live on Wednesday afternoon. Today is August 28th and today we are going to be diving into the quarterback battle between the Pittsburgh Steelers, quarterbacks Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Head coach Mike Tomlin said that the team is planning on making a decision about that conversation by the end of the week. So we'll talk about where we stand currently in terms of how the reports have sounded from practice and what we have seen in the preseason games. We will then be diving into the interesting report that broke a couple days ago about the Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Jalen Hurts and about how there is an anonymous head coach that said that the Eagles and Hurts have been figured out. So we will talk about what exactly he said, whether or not there is any validity to it, and whether or not Jalen Hurts can have a bounce-back season. We will then touch on the news that the Dallas Cowboys have signed running back Dalvin Cook. It's been an eventful week for them. We'll talk about what type of a role Cook could carve out for himself and why sneakily, after a disappointing 2023 season, Cook could maybe find some sort of a resurgence with the Cowboys in 2024. We will then be previewing the upcoming season for the San Francisco 49ers as we almost close out here the NFC West, and we will wrap up the show by discussing whether or not the Florida State Seminoles can work their way back into playoff contention after a lot of college football fans are ready to write them off following their Week 0 loss against Georgia Tech. So a whole lot to dive into today, but before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports, your thoughts on my opinions, or whether or not you have a burning question on anything else. Here at the GSMC Sports Network, we like to try and be as interactive as possible, and your input means a lot to us. Additionally, if you would like to become an even bigger part of the show, you can use the Super Chat button now available on YouTube to leave a tip or donation and get your comment recognized on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. Additionally, you can do so using the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, if that is what you prefer. Again, anything would be very greatly appreciated. We're going to kick off the show today by diving into the quarterback battle that is taking place in Pittsburgh between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, as it seems like we are getting the resolutions of the majority of rooms in the NFL. There are still a couple outliers. We talked about the New England Patriots yesterday, and today we are going to dive into the Pittsburgh Steelers, where it sounds like this is a decision that is going to be made by the end of the week, so we'll just dive into it here. And I want to start by looking at what we have seen from a national audience in terms of how Russell Wilson and Justin Fields have looked within these preseason games. Very limited opportunities, facing some lessened competition, so obviously not the perfect measuring stick. Behind the scenes, the Steelers have a lot more looks. Mike Tomlin even specifically talked about when he spoke to the media earlier this week that they're going to focus on the Steeler-on-Steeler evaluation this upcoming week. Steelers have a good defense, so that should give them internally a pretty good look at who is best suited to try and lead them back to the playoffs this year and win their first playoff game since 2016. So just looking at some of the numbers here, neither one of them have been incredibly impressive up to this point. Russell Wilson, the completion percentage definitely stands out. He is 10 of 12 throughout the preseason, but that was also, I would argue, some of what my issue with Russell Wilson was last year, that he could, complete passes and such and he would not take very high risk throws, and ultimately some of the stats on paper look a little bit better, but in terms of winning impact, I didn't really feel like it was there all that much for Denver last year. And to be fair to Russell Wilson, he was the leader on this Broncos team that was at least in playoff contention for a lot of the season up until everything broke out between him and Sean Payton. So, Russell Wilson, a veteran who can deliver some level of stability, but I do feel like to some degree at least, some of the numbers at face value can be a little bit deceiving. As you can see, between the 6 drives that he's had in the preseason has only resulted in a scoring drive once. That was on Sunday against the Detroit Lions. And he had a nice throw to George Pickens on the sideline on a 3rd and long. But outside of that, the majority of it was getting done in the run game against backup Detroit Lions defenders. So can only put so much stock into that. That being said, Justin Fields hasn't exactly been shining himself either and easily stealing this job from Russell Wilson, where he has had almost double the amount of drives and yet only has led 1 scoring drive. He's 19 of 27, 199 yards, and neither one of them have accounted for a touchdown up to this point. Now, for Fields, there's definitely the running upside with him in juxtaposition with Russell Wilson. I do know that obviously Russ is mobile. That's what he's made a lot of his career off of, is being this improviser. But Justin Fields is going to be, I think, pretty consensus, more of a threat, scrambling out of the pocket with designed quarterback runs. I don't see the Steelers utilizing that with Russell Wilson quite as much, so that is a positive for Justin Fields. Big issue as well, though, and this has been, not sure where you want to throw the blame necessarily, but Justin Fields, I think we're looking at 3 fumbled snaps so far. There were 2 in the season opener against I think it was the Houston Texans at that point. I think he might have been clean fumbles-wise against the Bills week 2, but had another one in this past week as well. Now, that one I thought was more on Zach Frazier snapping it when Justin Fields wasn't looking, but that's just something that I noticed, again, to at least make note of. Do I think that it's an indictment on Justin Fields? No, but he's also somebody that has a history of struggling with fumbles, so I thought I would add that in there. Again, not make or break. I feel like if he's getting quarterback 1 reps, he should be able to develop that relationship with the center, but it's been a little bit clunky there for Justin Fields. And sort of on the note of the offensive line, I think that the Steelers have definitively been playing their starting offensive line with both Wilson and Fields to try and get them as much protection and try and make this evaluation as clean as they possibly can. That being said, I think that the offensive line play has been a little bit shaky for them, which does have me worrying a little bit about whether or not it's even going to matter who's playing at quarterback. If neither one of them are elite, you might have some other glaring problems pop up. Now, that being said, I will add that I personally feel like in this upcoming season in 2024, Justin Fields would be somebody I think is more capable of operating with a dysfunctional offensive line. I mean, that's what Fields did for a number of years anyways when he was with the Chicago Bears. On the other side, Russell Wilson actually had a pretty good offensive line with the Broncos, and yet he was one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the NFL because of, to some degree at least, his own wrongdoing in my eyes, where he was holding onto the ball too long. Again, I mentioned I think he gets a little bit gun shy in terms of making the high risk plays. The way I perceive it, and this is just speculation, so just talking this out here, I feel like it at least somewhat has to do with Wilson being aware of what his standing in the NFL is, that his opportunities to remain a starting quarterback are maybe a little bit more limited now at this point in his career, and I feel like he gets at least slightly intimidated by the idea of having a bunch of turnovers to his name. So as a result, he sort of relies on just the safe plays, and he can make those safe plays 100%. But it's just a matter of the Steelers aren't looking for just safe play. Now, in comparison to what they got last year from a combination of Kenny Pickett, Mitchell Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph, safe is kind of an upgrade to some degree. So I do understand that, and I think Wilson can provide that stability, whereas Fields can be a little bit more erratic. But again, I think that they're going to need some risks to be taken at times, especially I've been very impressed by George Pickens in the preseason. I haven't always been huge on him. We know the talent. It's about the level of buy-in, and I think that the skill is really popping for George Pickens. Sometimes you're just going to have to let your receiver make a play and take a chance. Is Russell Wilson still capable of doing that? We will see. But like I mentioned, Mike Tomlin spoke to the media at the beginning of this week, and he said, quote, "We'll make a decision at the end of our work week this upcoming week." So he said that on Monday. We're now recording this live here on Wednesday afternoon. So it sounds like just a couple days left here until we get a definitive answer on what this situation's going to look like moving forward. And Mike Tomlin has some sense of pressure, I feel like. He did just sign a new contract extension with the Steelers for, I believe, an additional 3 seasons. So by no means do I think he's on the hot seat based off of the fact that they just gave him this contract. We know, though, especially with coaching contracts, teams will be willing to move off a little bit earlier. So I do think the pressure is slightly amped up. Like I referred to earlier, they haven't won a playoff game since 2016. Now, that being said, I do believe it's in large part due to the lack of stable quarterback play they've had over the past few years. An older Ben Roethlisberger, the combination of Kenny Pickett and those other quarterbacks the past couple seasons haven't been working out for them either. And they're hoping that Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, one of them can just take the job by the neck and sort of push the Steelers forward here, that they can feel confident at that position for the first time in years now. I do think that there is a little bit of a debate here, and I'd be fascinated to know what you all think in the comments section, referring to, obviously, this season is about winning for the Steelers. I keep mentioning this 2016 being the last playoff win for them, that Mike Tomlin, he isn't worried about the long-term future at this moment. He just wants that taste of winning. But how much should the Steelers consider Fields' potential to be their future quarterback? Because Fields is somebody, I thought that he had his best season of his career in 2023, and he was kind of put in a tough position, obviously from the jump, we know that, but especially this past year in the way that the Bears chose to operate. As much as Fields showed improvement, and if situations were different, I feel like the Bears would have moved on with Fields headed into next season. But the issue for them is that they had the number 1 overall pick for the second consecutive year. Last year, they passed up on using it on a quarterback. Justin Fields is about to be due for a 5th-year option that is, I believe, off the top of my head here, I think somewhere around $15 million. And then you would have to pay him the big bucks in this scenario. Or they could reset that quarterback contract with a prospect that was very much more highly regarded in comparison to what Justin Fields was coming out of college, and they end up taking Caleb Williams. So again, just based off of some outside factors, I think that's part of what got Fields, sent packing from Chicago. But that being said, again, building off of his best season of his career, you could maybe talk yourself into the Steelers that if Justin Fields works, that's sort of perfect for you, because you can move forward operating under the idea that Fields is the franchise quarterback. Now, I don't know if a big-time payday would occur just based off of one season. We'd have to see to what extent a successful season looks like for Justin Fields in a Steelers jersey, but there's real possibilities at this point where Justin Fields, part of that 2021 draft class, and at this point, I'm double checking on the fly here, but age-wise, he is just 25 years old. So you think that if the Steelers could, get the most out of Justin Fields, they might have an answer for years to come, which would be massive for the development of this team. So I think it's something they should consider. Like I mentioned, playoffs are what is on the mind of the Steelers, but I do think that if Justin Fields is showing some level of flash, that is something to seriously take into account. But ultimately, how I think this is going to play out is that I believe Russell Wilson is going to be named the starter at the end of this week. Do I agree with that? Not particularly. I'm not a huge... Russell Wilson is a great quarterback and has been for a decade, but I think his best years are behind him. I think he's much more limited now. And Justin Fields, like I mentioned, I kind of have some concerns with the offensive line. I think he's better suited to play with the rest of the offense. And again, I don't think that the talent drop-off from Russell Wilson to Justin Fields is even really existent. I was going to say substantial, but I don't even know if Russell Wilson is better than Fields at this point. Now, the Steelers have better, obviously more eyes on this quarterback competition. Seems like to me, to some degree, and something to at least consider, is the fact that the Steelers almost seemed like they made a verbal agreement with Russell Wilson when they signed him in free agency, and then Justin Fields also just happened to fall into their lap. So based off of that, I kind of feel like the integrity of the organization a little bit is probably rooting for Russell Wilson to, take over this job convincingly. But that being said, nothing is given to you in life, let alone in the NFL, which is one of the most cutthroat businesses you can possibly be in. And he's had all training camp to prove himself. Now, the calf injury definitely derailed that. The calf injury that he suffered right at the beginning of training camp did open the door a little bit more for Fields, took away some valuable reps from Russell Wilson. But that being said, I don't know. I don't know if I'd really be putting all that much stock into Russell Wilson. I think he's going to start, but I think that the leash for how long they decide to stick with that should be very short, where you look at their schedule, the first few games we should know to some degree, where it is at Atlanta, at Denver, versus the Chargers. I think those three games really... I actually like the Colts defense, and I think that playing in Indy is a little bit of an underrated scenario to come in as a visiting player. But I think through those first 3-4 weeks, we should know whether or not Russell Wilson is the option. Otherwise, I think that the Steelers at least got to roll the dice here on what they have in Justin Fields. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section, because it is not an easy answer here, especially because neither one of them have really stolen that job up to this point. So, again, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We are now, though, going to be diving into the report that was announced, I believe it was yesterday, that an anonymous defensive coach thinks that Jalen Hurts was exposed last season with his struggles against the blitz, and that he has been figured out, and that the turnover as well with the coaching staff and on the offensive line is going to potentially be the fatal flaw of the Philadelphia Eagles this season. So we'll be diving further into that report, but before we do so, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the station. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose, if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into the report that came out yesterday. I believe it was yesterday, and it was from The Athletic. It was Mike Sando of The Athletic reported that an anonymous NFL defensive coach told him, quote, "The word is out there, if you run zero blitz against Hurts or show zero and back everyone out, he will panic." He added, that has to change. They lose Jason Kelce, who handled their protections, basically did everything, and you bring in a coordinator who likes to drop back. It will be interesting. So this was, of course, referring to Eagles quarterback Jalen Hurts, who suffered is probably the wrong word. He had his worst season, really, since sort of seeming like he was emerging over the past couple of years, that he definitely saw some regression in 2023, where the numbers were still fine. He was 3,800 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, but a career-high 15 interceptions. And on this idea that this head coach, which, by the way, I never love, fully taking these anonymous quotes into consideration. They're interesting to talk about, but at the same time, you do have to keep in mind, I understand the anonymous part of it does sort of take away from a little bit of its credibility, that we don't have a ton of details on who this could be. But it sounds like he's somebody who is in the league for defensive coaching purposes and has done his analysis and has seen the struggles with Jalen Hurts against the blitz. And part of that would be backed up by the fact that he had his career-high 15 interceptions. 8 of those came against the blitz, according to ESPN. And it's been a little bit of a roller coaster for the Eagles these past couple years, going to the Super Bowl in 2022, feeling like this was the start of something. And then last year, obviously, there was dysfunction behind the scenes, where ESPN put out their article about the divide that was sort of formed between Jalen Hurts and head coach Nick Sirianni, that Hurts wanted to evolve the offense and Sirianni sort of wanted to stick to his roots. Now, that definitely played a factor in the Eagles' offense being less explosive. Jalen Hurts dealing with, I believe it was a knee injury for a lot of the year. Didn't take him out of many games, but it was something that was clearly impacting his level of mobility, which does also play into this idea of how to beat the blitz. For clarification as well, this idea of zero blitz that this particular NFL head coach was talking about, it's basically to some degree sending the house and knowing that you're going to have a free rusher and forcing Jalen Hurts to move a little bit. And when you're dealing with an injured knee, that obviously becomes significantly more difficult as well. So that's also something to take into consideration with this all. Jason Kelce, like this coach mentioned, is no longer there in place for the Eagles. And especially over these past couple years, it's been a little, and deservingly so, because Jason Kelce is a phenomenal football player and a phenomenal entertainer that I'm really looking forward to seeing him become an analyst here. But he he's definitely gotten his share of love over these past couple years, and it's going to be a significant, change on the offensive line for the Eagles, who were one of the best groups that we've seen in recent years from these past couple seasons. Cam Jurgens now taking over that center spot from them. Mekhi Becton, how about this, by the way, as well? I know this probably only interests a few people, but ended up being a free agent signing for the Philadelphia Eagles, the former first-round pick for the Jets, who never really worked out there. Worked his way onto the Eagles starting line as a right guard. So Becton used to be a tackle, now is expected to be in that starting five. Injuries have definitely played a role in Becton's lack of success up to this point in his NFL career, but still a very young player at just 25 years old, was the 11th overall pick in 2020. So I'm definitely keeping an eye on that, but it's going to be a little bit of a different look from the offensive line, like the coach mentioned as well. New offensive coordinator in the building for the Eagles. It is now Kellen Moore taking over for the Eagles. This idea that he likes to drop back more. It is, as he quite literally said, it will be interesting. And I think that ultimately this is a little bit of hyperbole. Just Jalen Hurts, I understand. I've never been all in on him necessarily anyways, but this idea that he was fully exposed and that there's no way for him to take the next step. He was looking to take the step last season, but Nick Sirianni was resistant to that in terms of next step being evolving the offense. And now that it seems like they're on the same page more, that Sirianni is willing to give up a little bit of control in terms of play calling and what the offense looks like. I'm sure he still has his very fair share of input, but it seems like the Eagles are going to try and shake things up a little bit. And I'm not in full panic mode about Jalen Hurts. Again, this is to some degree what we saw a little bit with him in college, was coming out hot and then sort of just not ever being able to reach that elite level. That was the case when he was at Alabama and opened the door for Tua Tagovailoa to take over and end up stealing the job from him. Now, Hurts is a professional and he's always going to, work as hard as he can, at least, not that I know the guy, but from all of the reporting and the stories around him, he seems like a true leader, and that he is going to continue to put in that work to get better. But, there are at least maybe some questions about whether or not Jalen Hurts just isn't ever going to be that elite quarterback that people were putting him in conversations in 2022, which, by the way, I think was premature for that to be the case from him. And Hurts had a very good season, 3,700 yards, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Talking about 2022 here, he additionally, trying to find the rushing yards on the fly here as well, but yeah, another 760 yards on the ground. That he is still going to be an impactful, positive player. But this idea that he's just going to continue to be up and work his way. I think I saw Dan Greenberg the other day when he was talking about this topic, talk about that Jalen Hurts was on a Hall of Fame trajectory. And I like Jalen Hurts, but Hall of Fame trajectory for someone who's had 2 good seasons, 3 good seasons, 2.5 maybe. And the fact that, this isn't anybody who was coming out of college, some top-end prospect. After Alabama didn't work out for him, he transfers to Oklahoma, and he lets it rip there, and ultimately got himself drafted in the 2nd round. But again, we're talking about a 2nd-round pick. A couple good years doesn't mean that already it seems like you're on your way to being a Hall of Famer. The Eagles have had very good offenses around Jalen Hurts as well, and it's only gotten better since when they added A.J. Brown to the mix additionally. So I think we got to pump the brakes a little bit on both ends of the spectrum. I don't think he was ever going to be, Not that it's not possible still, but people were putting him in conversations that probably should not have been the case a couple years ago, and now all of a sudden everybody wants to write off Jalen Hurts. I have a very hard time imagining that Jalen Hurts will ever really be a negative starting quarterback. Now, is he going to be somebody who can fully put the team on his back and, with a shakier offensive line and without weapons, someone that you can anticipate going on, this unreal tear to sort of backpack his team to the Super Bowl? I'm definitely not putting stake in that, but this idea that it's going to be impossible, really, for Jalen Hurts to be able to learn to deal with pressure a little bit better, especially if it becomes so public that I just feel like, generally speaking, with these athletes, if somebody says this is your fatal flaw, you can't do it, that should be sort of the number one thing that you are continuing to work on, especially when it's something as pivotal for an NFL quarterback in terms of learning to navigate pressure. And with identify blitzes, be able to make the right calls at the line of scrimmage, like such as the coach was talking about before. Jason Kelce was massively instrumental in pointing out these types of things and helping the offensive line to recognize what's going on. They lose Jason Kelce. That's going to be significantly more. Obviously, Cam Jurgens is going to have to take over at least some of that. But additionally, it's going to be on Jalen Hurts to, be able to organize the offense in a way that is able to pick up on these types of things. So I think there's going to be growing pains sort of this upcoming season, and it's not going to be perfect. But this idea that all of a sudden, this anonymous NFL coach talks about, oh, Jalen Hurts doesn't do well against the blitz, and all of your 31 teams are going to be like, oh, I don't know how we thought about that. Yeah, let's just blitz him more. I don't think it's that simple. That being said, Bleacher Report covered this story as well, and they did an interesting job of incorporating as well the idea that San Francisco 49ers defensive end Nick Bosa has publicly to the media talked about other teams need to try and replicate what we do against Hurts because we are very convinced in the defense that we run against Jalen Hurts. So interesting point there. Maybe there are some real keys, but again, I think that it's so much more simple than if you just throw a zero blitz at Jalen Hurts every single play, that this offense isn't going to be able to adjust. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. A very interesting story to come out, especially at this time with, the Eagles now 9 days away from their season opener. They're playing the first Friday night, so should be really interesting to monitor this upcoming season. Eyes definitely going to be on Jalen Hurts, especially with navigating the pressure. But we are now going to be taking a quick break, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into another one of the top teams in the NFC and actually sticking in that NFC East, as we are going to dive into the news that this morning the Dallas Cowboys have signed running back Dalvin Cook to a new contract. So we are going to be diving into that, but first, quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to dive into the news that broke this morning that the Dallas Cowboys are signing former Pro Bowl running back Dalvin Cook to a one-year deal. And obviously, it's the first thing that came to my mind, at least, is that if this were 2019, the Cowboys would have one of the most talented running back rooms in recent league history between Dalvin Cook and Zeke Elliott. You're talking about the versions of them from 2019. Now, obviously, we've come a long way since then, and that is no longer the case. But running back has definitely been a spot of weakness for the Cowboys these past couple seasons. Tony Pollard unable to really become the real bell cow running back that they were hoping in 2023. So now they head into this upcoming season. It seemed like for a lot of the offseason, they didn't really have all that many answers, and yet now you can talk yourself into having some talented players. Now, to what level of degree that they're actually going to be impactful is definitely still up in the air. Again, you're talking about this, having these two guys in the forms that they were a few years ago, you're extremely excited. But Zeke and Dalvin are definitely not at that same level today. Now, I want to start by talking about Dalvin Cook and sort of whether or not he will be able to resurrect any part of his career. Because I thought that in 2022, he was still a good running back for the Vikings. Now, at that point, he had career lows in yards per attempt and yards per game. Actually, second lowest yards per game. But less impressive there. But that being said, he was still fine with over 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. Like, that's overall a solid season for a running back. Made the Pro Bowl for whatever that means. But then in 2020, heading into that season, the Vikings felt confident, almost similarly to kind of what went down with the Cowboys, is the Vikings felt like they had a running back in the wings that could be more impactful or just as impactful for less money. So they ended up releasing Dalvin Cook, trying to promote Alexander Mattison to running back one. That did not work out the way that they were hoping, but Cook ended up with the New York Jets. The thought was that he could take on a large portion of the carries while Breece Hall is still recovering. He, of course, suffered a torn ACL during his rookie season in 2022 that seemed like there was going to be an opportunity for Cook to at least take some early season reps. And ultimately, Breece Hall came back way before people were anticipating and looked like a very good version of himself once again, to the point where there wasn't really any need for Dalvin Cook. And he ends up getting cut a good portion of the way through the season. Signs with the Ravens, didn't have all that much going for him there either. Maybe I was just fooled by a couple nice runs that I feel like I saw him rip off in that 2023 season during their playoff run, but didn't ever really seem like they were at that point. And to be fair, they picked him up for the playoffs, so it's not like all of a sudden they were going to take this guy who's gotten minimal reps all season long, only 67 carries last year with the Jets, and that they were going to have him be a feature back on a playoff team. That's a pretty tall ask. But Cook now at least, no, he did not get a training camp with Dallas, much of one at least. Maybe he'll get a week or so. But that being said, I mean, he's at least going to sort of come into a situation in Dallas with time to prove himself before the urgency of games start to step up to the next level. And again, Cook, it's not like you're going to get elite level production for him or Ezekiel Elliott, but you kind of get, I know they're not the same versions of themselves that got them paid in the first place, but you have a little bit more of a speed receiving option in Dalvin Cook. I know that, maybe that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but somebody who could be more so of a third down back there. Zeke can still be a goal line back. I don't think he gets enough credit for his blocking either. That I think that overall the running back room, it's it looked very underwhelming, even as much as recent as yesterday, where you look at Rico Dowell and I think Deuce Vaughn is in there as well. That not exactly a great sign, but ultimately, I mean, you can sort of piece together a fine run game with where they're at right now. Rico Dowell actually is still listed, at least as of this morning, on ESPN as the running back 2 on the depth chart. We'll see whether or not Dalvin Cook is able to climb his way back into a more prominent role. So to be fair, we could be talking about this right now and ultimately just forget about the existence of Cook on the Cowboys. It's very much possible. I don't think that there really is a feature back on this Cowboys team, though, which to me kind of feels like they can get a little bit creative with how to use these different players all effectively and try and give opposing defenses different looks. Now, obviously, we'll have to see about that. Still sort of a TBD. But it sort of goes to speak to the fact that in general, with this Cowboys offense, you feel like it should be one of the highest performing groups once again, like they were last year. Dak Prescott was playing at a, MVP, almost an MVP level. He finished second. He was in the race. I wouldn't say it was an elite season, but it was a very good year for Dak. Definitely a career high and definitely replicable in my opinion. That being said, the other holes on the offense does lead to some question marks. They locked down CeeDee Lamb for the long term. They got that deal done on Monday, which is obviously a huge plus for them because now they no longer have to worry about the idea of CeeDee Lamb sitting out. And he can be your feature guy. Outside of that, the receiving core is not great, I would say. Brandon Cooks is your receiver too. He's fine. Jalen Tolbert, somebody who's flashed some potential. Maybe you get something out of him, but I don't feel great about that group. The tight ends also fine between Jake Ferguson and Luke Schoonmaker, but not an excellent group there. And then I've talked about this before. I think the offensive line has a chance to flat out be bad this upcoming season. Now, we'll see how ready first-round selection Tyler Guyton is this upcoming year. We'll see if some of these other players are able to step up for them. Terrence Steele with a pretty rough 2023 campaign. And then they have Brock Hoffman starting at center, who was an undrafted free agent last season and 2 seasons ago, and he's now going to be your starting center. So it's a very young group across the board for the Cowboys, and I just kind of feel like any bodies you bring in there can help be impactful for you to at least some degree. Still going to be definitely a TBD on what level of production anybody outside of CeeDee Lamb can really give you, but that's where I feel like take a flyer on Dalvin Cook. I don't think that last year, him not getting any sort of a feature role on the Jets is more so about the talent level of Breece Hall than it is sort of where Dalvin Cook is at. That being said, Dalvin is headed into his age 29 season, just turned 29 at the second week of August. So we know clock's ticking a little bit on Dalvin Cook, but I definitely do feel like there's a world in which he could carve out a role for himself. Now, maybe I'm just too big on the nostalgia of this deal and with Dalvin Cook, but I don't know. I think that it is going to be a very interesting situation. As we do have a comment that we will address now. If you have any comments on Dalvin Cook as well, be happy to answer those. But Robert Bruce says the Patriots have some big decisions to make. Number one, starter I think should be Drake May. Don't forget Peyton Manning, his rookie season, threw for 30 interceptions and turned out to be one of the GOATs. So I definitely agree. I just got an ESPN notification as well that Gerard Mayo, their new head coach, has reportedly decided on who that quarterback is going to be, but isn't going to announce it until Thursday. Not sure what the point of even putting that out into the world is. Mayo has definitely been a little bit oversharing I would say, to the media to some degree. But it's definitely a big conversation for the Patriots moving forward here as to whether or not it's responsible, I'll say, to start Drake May, because from what I've seen, I think that he could definitely give them, I'm not going to say definitely, but I think that Drake May can give the Patriots a better chance to succeed based off of how they are currently built with a bad offensive line, that Drake May is more mobile and more athletic than Jacoby Brissett, that he can probably find a way to become just a better option as opposed to Jacoby Brissett, who, I'm not going to say he's a statue in the pocket, but he does not have that same level of mobility, and we saw him end up getting crushed on Sunday night when the team played against the Washington Commanders. That I think it's more so about the safety and the long-term prospect of Drake May, because you're right, 30 interceptions for Peyton Manning in his rookie season, pretty infamous at this point, but you're right. At the end of the day, he's one of the greatest players of all time, so hard to knock him all too much because of that. I think it's less so about the idea of him throwing interceptions than him mechanically falling into bad habits, trying to play with this poor offensive line, this idea that coming into the NFL, his footwork really wasn't all that great, and that he was a little bit more of a raw prospect, to the point where you just don't want him to end up screwing himself up, whether it's muscle memory and his process, or if it's confidence-based, because I don't think that this is a group in New England that is really built to instill confidence in a quarterback. But yeah, I mean, let me know what your thoughts are. I talked about this on the show yesterday. My opinion is that the Patriots should start Jacoby Brissett, ease Drake May into this. Again, not because of the idea that he isn't ready for it, but just because of the fact that it seems like whoever is playing quarterback for the Patriots is going to take some hits. There's no rush for Drake May and this Patriots team to press the jump start button. Drake May is going to play for the Patriots this year. I feel very confident about that. It's just about week one. I think I would probably steer in a different direction if I am the Patriots. But ultimately, again, this decision's on Gerard Mayo. I don't think he's done a great job of managing his comments to the media up to this point. But again, sounds like he has his decision made. So probably either tomorrow or on Friday, we will have some reactions to whatever that decision may be. But we are now going to move on here. We're going to dive into the upcoming season for the San Francisco 49ers, where they were oh so close to winning a Super Bowl last year. And while the whole squad is back just about, they still have a good amount of pressure at this point, from Kyle Shanahan and his personal reputation to understanding where the clock is at financially for this 49ers team, and we'll be diving into their key moves from the offseason and looking at their schedule to make a prediction on what their record will be. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break. Do not go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we now move on here with this week. We're doing our final set of season previews. We have the NFC West, and today we have the reigning Super Bowl runner-ups in the San Francisco 49ers, who have a whole lot of pressure facing them this upcoming season. Now, pressure comes in a couple different forms. There's this idea of you are on the bad end of your job and this is a prove-it season, or there's on the other side that you're so good but you need to reach the heights of expectations that have been laid on you, and that's where the 49ers are at, where they have been perennial NFC champion appearances, made it to 2 Super Bowls in the past handful of years, but are yet to win the big one. So this, to some degree, could be considered a make or break season for the 49ers. I think that make or break and this idea of windows closing gets thrown around a little bit too much, because ultimately if your infrastructure is good at its core, I think it's hard to fully write off the idea of you'll never be able to compete again if you don't win this season. But the clock is most certainly ticking for the 49ers, who are going to already one of the most expensive teams in the NFL, and that is only going to get more complicated as Brock Purdy is going to be eligible for a contract extension after this season. And I think unless something disastrous takes place for Brock Purdy this season, I think he's going to be making $50 million plus. Now, let me know in the comments section whether or not you agree with that take. I know it sounds like a ton of money, but at the same time, Brock Purdy, I understand he's not the most physically outstanding quarterback that we have in the NFL or anything along those lines, but the mental processing with him, the decision making, and the precision with the majority of his throws is at the level enough. If Jared Goff just got a $50 million contract extension this offseason, Brock Purdy, sure, I know everybody's always going to hold on to the fact that he was the last pick in the draft, and it sort of leads to this idea, well, oh, Brock Purdy's taking this 49ers team to the Super Bowl. Anybody can. I think that that's so disingenuous to the point where we've seen 2 really good seasons from Purdy up to this point. And no, he's probably not ever going to be, in that top 5 quarterback conversation, but he is very much in play for getting a massive deal. And also just noticing, by the way, that Football Reference has his nickname as Mr. Relevant, which is kind of funny considering just how bad the Mr. Irrelevant comments were for him the entire first year and a half of his career until he proved himself. And I think that's what he did. He led multiple comeback wins in this year's playoffs against the Packers and against the Lions, to the point where I think you can be comfortable with the idea of him taking that next step. Now, that being said, he has obviously benefited from an excellent surrounding offense, whether you're talking about Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, a treasure chest of different weapons to play with, to the point where he's definitely benefited from his situation, but he's also made the most of it. And I think that he deserves credit for that. Now, that being said, I just listed a number of different, very talented players on that offensive side of the ball. And once he gets his money, it's going to make things very difficult for the 49ers moving forward in terms of how they will be able to spend their money. And we're seeing the ramifications for that a little bit prematurely with how this summer and with how the off-season conversations have taken place, even to the point where, actively speaking here, offensive tackle Trent Williams and wide receiver Brandon Ayuk are holding out of camp because they want new contracts. And I think it becomes very difficult for the 49ers, understanding how expensive they already are, to be trying to balance their current finances plus what Brock Purdy is going to have to make next year, and additionally balancing out the likes of Williams and Ayuk and whoever else. I feel like ultimately how this is going to shake out is that they're both going to return for the 49ers this season, and it's just going to be business as usual once the year actually comes around here. But it's been a very noisy offseason, which has been unfortunate for the 49ers because, again, I think they're one of the great teams in the NFL right now and that they are going to have a chance to repeat as NFC champions and have another crack at the Super Bowl. So they got to get focused, but I'm still a very big believer in the talent that they have on the roster. And sort of diving into the specifics of both their offense and defense. Offensively, when you look at this 49ers team, I mean, it's no surprise. I just mentioned all of the different skill position players that they have. The offensive line is also a very solid group as well, as long as, you know, there's definitely a real feel for any time that Trent Williams missed times. The offense took a hit by it, but overall, I would say you have probably a league average offensive line that has a chance to sort of take that to another level when everybody is all healthy. But again, it's not exceptional, but if you, with those weapons, as long as you have a passable offensive line, I think you're sitting in a very nice position. So we already, for the most part, talked about what their offense looks like this year. The only, real wrinkle this year is also adding Ricky Pearsall, who they drafted at the end of the first round. Ricky Pearsall was one of my favorite wide receivers in college when he was at Florida. I'm a Patriots fan myself. He reminds me a lot of Julian Edelman, and I think that that's kind of the perfect type of player at this point in particular, given that Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle, for that matter, are all very prominent, number ones. They basically are all number ones that all just coexist. It's a ridiculous receiving core. But Ricky Pearsall can be the guy just sort of lining up in the slot, making those plays underneath, and then just keeping opposing defenses honest. So again, I did want to just very briefly there highlight Pearsall as a potential X factor. Feels like it's a lot of expectations for him, but he could definitely make his mark on the upcoming season. Defensively, also still a very solid core. They've dealt with loads of turnover over the past few years, including defensive coordinator, where they're heading into yet another season with a new defensive coordinator. They decided to fire Steve Wilkes after the Super Bowl, which was definitely a bit of a controversial decision from Kyle Shanahan following that. Defense actually held up pretty well, all things considered, allowing 19 points in regulation to Patrick Mahomes. It's a pretty good accomplishment. Again, I didn't love, and especially considering the fact that that entire game changed when it was Dre Greenlaw going down with his torn Achilles. I thought at that point, that's when backup linebacker Oren Burks started to get picked on, and that sort of in the middle, underneath stuff really opened up for the Chiefs, which ended up hurting the 49ers big time. But are moving forward with Nick Sorensen as the new defensive coordinator, so we'll see how that plays out. But 49ers, definitely some under-the-radar moves in terms of just finding veterans that can carve out a role for themselves this upcoming season. Just some veterans in Leonard Floyd, Malik Collins, Yetur Gross-Matos on the front line. You add former All-Pro linebacker Devondre Campbell to the mix as well, where Campbell is probably going to start the season while Dre Greenlaw is recovering from that torn Achilles injury. And then even when Greenlaw comes back, at that point, maybe Campbell evolves into something more substantial for them and somebody who could get real playing time for them in the playoffs. At this point, Greenlaw, don't have a ton of details on what the timeline looks like, but it seems like late in the year he should be able to become available. And I just think the secondary is probably, if you're going to have concerns, that's where you're looking. Now, we don't know exactly what Talanoa Hufanga is going to look like when he comes back, but one of the best safeties in the league in 2022 was out for half of the season in 2023 and missed all of the playoffs, so it's going to take him a little bit of time, I feel like, to fully find his form. I'm confident in him at this point, but you also just can't lock him in as being exactly as impactful as he was pre-injury. And that was sort of the area of the 49ers defense that we had a little bit more doubts about, where they were relying on a lot of young players, Jair Brown, Ambry Thomas, coming off of those final few playoff games. So I think it's going to be a good defense. We'll have to see what it looks like under Sorensen. But diving into their schedule, they have a first place schedule for a reason. A bunch of very tough teams on the board. Super Bowl rematch week 7. You have a week 8 matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. In both of those matchups, the real positive for them is the fact that they're at home, but they also have a couple tough road games as well. On the road against Buffalo week 13, week 12 on the road against Green Bay, and then at Miami as well in week 16. So they'll have some tough teams on the schedule, also playing the Lions as well in week 17. I think that the 49ers can have their season locked up, though, on, by that point. The first part of their schedule, I think they should be able to roll through, to be honest. Weeks 1 through 5, all of those are very winnable games for them. Week 6, you could throw into that. I think Seattle's going to be a good team this year. Playing in Seattle is never easy, but take your pick. First 5-6 weeks, I think the 49ers could reasonably be looking at something like 5-1. But ultimately, I think that they're gonna continue to have the success that we've seen in these past couple years. They're going to put themselves in position to be among one of the top teams in the NFC during the regular season. I have them coming out with 12 wins. I gotta double check here what the over/under line is for them. I believe that when I did this preseason, when the lines first came out, we were looking at somewhere around 11.5, 12.5 wins. So very briefly here, it looks like 11.5. So technically that's according to Sharp Football Analysis. So I would have them slightly over here. A lot of people are sketched out about this idea of a Super Bowl hangover. There's only been one team in the 21st century that has made it back to the Super Bowl following a Super Bowl loss, and that was Tom Brady and the Patriots in 2018. So, tall task, 100%, but I really do trust the infrastructure of this 49ers team. But let me know whether or not you are as confident as I am, as we are going to be headed into our final segment of the day. We're switching gears from NFL to college football a little bit, and I want to talk about Florida State and whether or not they can work themselves back into playoff contention, because a lot of people are just writing them for dead already because of their week 0 upset loss against Georgia Tech. But I think that that's a bit of an overreaction. So I will explain why and talk about what needs to change moving forward for the Seminoles to be able to reinsert their name into playoff contention. But first, we're going to be taking our final break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where I want to discuss Florida State at this point, who everybody is down in the dumps about their chances for this upcoming season. We're ranked the number 10 team in the country headed into week 0. obviously a brutal loss to Georgia Tech has now soured everybody's opinions on what this team could be. And I think that is slightly irresponsible, just in terms of the idea that if your argument is this loss is going to be one that Florida State can't recover from a resume perspective, because I don't know how heavily the committee is going to hold a loss in a foreign country in Ireland in week 0 against Florida State, and if they have the same number of wins as another one of these teams for an at-large bid. I think it's far more about the actual quality of the team itself. And if that is your argument, then I can hear you out on it. So on that note, some of the specific notes that you could definitely point to based off of their Georgia Tech loss as concerns for the remainder of the season that could get in the way of them winning the games that they should from here on out. Number one complaint that a lot of people have had with Florida State is the lack of trust in quarterback DJ Uiagalelei. And I think that this comes from both a fan perspective, but also with the coaches, because they really didn't give him, in my opinion, that many opportunities to try and give Florida State a little bit of extra juice with the passing game. When they did, it was in the fourth quarter on that final drive of the game where DJ converted multiple 4th and longs and ultimately gave them a tie game with 6.5 minutes left. Now, I talked about this at length on Monday, so I don't want to harp on it too much. Within that same game, there were negatives as well that were coming from DJ on the drive, where he would sort of set himself back due to some poor plays and ultimately was able to make up for it. Now, you just prefer that it's clean off the rip, but I do think that he was still able to come up for them in big moments. The first one I thought was really impressive as well, where he was sliding up and to the left and was able to go downfield. And I thought that was a really good sign just overall of DJ. I know he had the throw short on his first real deep attempt to Ja'Kai Douglas over the middle on the deep crosser. That was bad. It was definitely bad, and that's where, when you talk about the development of DJ over the course of the years, those are the plays that we really would have wanted him to be making by this point, considering what the expectations were from him as one of the top high school quarterbacks coming into college football as a 5-star. But that's obviously no longer the case. I'm not putting too much stock in the idea of whether or not he can be an NFL level quarterback. All I want from him right now is to be able to produce on a weekly basis of being good enough and occasionally being able to make the big plays at this point in his I believe it's his 5th season, of being able to make plays when it matters to help push your team over the edge. And it wasn't perfect by any stretch in this game. I do kind of think that last drive showed that he's capable of it. Now, he didn't end up getting to be able to touch the ball after that, so obviously, only so much you can say to that. Great, he led a game-tying drive in the fourth quarter. I understand that doesn't really hit the same way. But that being said, talk about the lack of faith in him, and with the coaches, that's sort of a bigger problem of the conservative play calling was a red flag to me. Now, everything was pretty much underneath. I think that they can have a good running game this upcoming season. They have a couple very talented running backs in the transfer Roydell Williams from Alabama and Lawrence Toafili. Both of them can be positive impact players. They have Davis as well, the freshman, who I'm definitely intrigued in as well. They have an offensive line with a lot of experience. I believe I have this number right. 210 combined starts from their starting 5. So that's a group that should be able to, hold it down. I thought they got beat pretty bad in this game, and that is also a pretty big concern, is the idea of this is a Florida State team on both sides of the ball, especially so defensively. But offense, it goes for the offense as well, that they got beat big time in the trenches, and that cannot be the case for the Seminoles if they want to have success this season, and especially if they're just only going to rely on the run game and not even try really to burn teams on the perimeter and downfield. But they're going to need to pose a real threat throwing the ball. I thought the Georgia Tech secondary was able to step up and sort of gamble a little bit, being aggressive in the run game, because Mike Norvell and this Florida State offense never really tested them down the field. So the conservative play calling, and this is kind of like football nerd thing, I really liked some of the run designs. I thought were really clever with the misdirections, the different angles they came at it, using motions, all of those different sort of little things. But it was the decision making, like, it can look cool, but if you don't get the actual production, it means nothing for you. And if you're calling those plays at the wrong time and not supplementing it with passing offense threats either, you're doing yourself no favors. So that was a concern for me. And additionally as well, I talked about it. Are they going to be at least somewhat like the defense they were last year, where their defense was able to, not single-handedly, Jordan Travis had some big games for them, but their defense is really what kept them in it all year long. And they just got pushed around by Georgia Tech, which, granted, a very good running game. They were number 1 in the ACC last year in rush yards per game, and basically any significant rushing stat. That it's not like this is some pushover of a competition here, but you can't lose those matchups to Georgia Tech, because how are you going to match up with some of the, there's so much talk about the ACC's standing in comparison to the SEC and the Big Ten. You're not going to be able to match up with those teams if you can't win games in the trenches, because that should be a benefit for you. But I digress there. Florida State, though, so those are all notes on if you're going to come away from that game with red flags and you think that it could end up being a problem for them this upcoming season. I can at least hear you out. That being said, Florida State does play in the ACC, and they have a few teams in the race for that ACC championship, but it's not the deepest conference in the world. Florida State, number 1 in the ACC preseason poll. They were followed by Clemson, Miami, and NC State as the top 4. All 4 of those teams in the top 25 to kick off the season. Outside of that, you have Louisville, who's expected to take a step back. Virginia Tech actually got some votes for the number 1 team in the ACC, which I thought was pretty crazy. And then SMU, now in the conference, probably not a real competitor year 1, a team that I'm keeping my eyes on, but it took a 14-point fourth quarter comeback to knock off Nevada, who was coming into the season last in the preseason polls for the Mountain West. So I don't know how much stock I'm necessarily putting into SMU just based off of that one win. But I would bet that the winner of the ACC is going to be one of Florida State, Clemson, or Miami. Sorry, NC State. I think they're going to be, in that top 25 mix. I'd be surprised if they make a run to the playoffs, but who knows? Maybe it's the year of NC State. We saw what happened in March Madness. But I think that, generally speaking here, Florida State, I think that, first off, this loss for Florida State kind of helps the ACC as a whole in terms of this idea that maybe they are a little bit deeper than people had once considered. And also, I think that Florida State probably has the best chance out of any ACC team to get an at-large bid, that if one of these other teams win the ACC championship, but Florida State, obviously this is a tough loss for this case and the idea of an at-large bid, but they're probably the team that could do it. Now, that being said, I think that they really put themselves behind the sticks with this loss, and it could very well require an ACC championship to be able to come out of this, but I mean, who knows? Someone's got to come out of the ACC. Going to be really interesting. Obviously, this weekend, a massive matchup between Clemson and Georgia that at least Florida State can maybe have a little bit of breathing room if Clemson does lose to Georgia, which will probably be the case. But you never know because Georgia's without their top two running backs for this first game. And, who knows? Things will be interesting there. But ultimately, I don't feel great about Florida State based off of some of the things that I just listed and this idea that they could have a chance to snag an at-large bid, but they're going to need to have, at this point, no more than 2 losses, and they're going to need to capitalize on the, crucial moments of the season. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that